Lucky Boys Podcast.
North Korea, imagine those circles, but now those circles are so small, right? The population has decreased so much. So you pretty much know everybody. Right?
Now that population reduction, was that by design?
I don't think so. And I don't think that that's something that they would have wanted, especially when you look at it from a military standpoint, when you look at it from a leadership standpoint, right? Yes, it's easier to govern, right? But when you see that many people dying, the people aren't going to be happy with you, you know? So it was a consequence of certain things that happened within leadership and the choices that they made, right? But I don't think that's something that they wanted.
Where did it begin? Which era did that turnaround begin where South Korea caught up to North Korea and surpassed it?
So it was, again, so let's take a look at the historical timeline, right? You have Korea, and South Korea, right, became one of the Asian tigers, right? That was technically under the military dictatorship of Park Chung-hee, right? He was very unpopular. He was a military leader, right? And what he was focused on was the economic, dare I say, independence of South Korea, right? So he wanted to build the country up, right? So under him, right, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, you have this military leader in the north, military leader in the south, but the military leader in the north, had all these, they were trading with the Soviet Russia and China at the time, and the Eastern Bloc of Europe, because that's where the Soviet bloc was, right? So they had that free flowing trade. Once the fall of the Soviet Union came down, that's really when things started getting really rough for them, right? That's when South Korea, right? You saw them; they had a rough start, but you have this military leader. Now, again, not popular, but what he did was he built up Korea. All the major highways, all the infrastructure projects, he was really pushing that. So the industrialization of Korea, right? That was all under him. And it was, people, he didn't do it the best way, right? But he did it.
Yeah,
right?
You're saying that he took power and basically maybe took land from other people and to make sure that infrastructure was built?
Pretty much, right? So, it was a bit strong-armed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, did he do it? Yeah. Was it popular? Probably not, right? But did he get the country to be developed? Yeah. And so you have all the conglomerates, the chaebols that you hear about, right? Coming up at that time and things like that. Now, when you look at South Korea, there was all that happening, like 80s, 90s, bam, IMF crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have development, you have everything going, and then boom, the IMF crisis hit. Basically, basically, you had the economic crisis that formed because of speculation and all that kind of stuff. All this, basically, they were these companies, these conglomerates. They weren't necessarily supposedly, they weren't managing the money very well, and so you have all this debt and things like that. So you have a debt crisis, and so now Korea is looking to get the IMF funds and stuff like that. They wanted a bailout. Somebody said no, and basically all these companies began to now fall.
Mm-hmm.
There was no bailout, so there's a lot of the people that were out of work. The wages actually decreased by a lot because people were taking in more dollars rather than won. The won dropped, so it went from 600 or 800 to $1 per dollar to 15, close to 1,500 per dollar. So it almost lost half, almost all its value, right? So it was a very rough time, but then they got through that. Funny enough, because there was a sense of nationalism, right? There is a parallel to this in North Korea. There's a sense of Koreans coming together and putting all their gold so that they can pay off this IMF debt, and so that's what they did. They did that on their own volition. Because
citizens of South Korea collectively put their money together to pay off the country's debt?
Yeah, you can look it up. The IMF crisis.
Voluntarily?
Well, there was it was a national effort. So
that's incredible.
It's a democracy, right? So you have a choice. You can do it, and they did it on behalf of Korea, right? Because Koreans were pretty educated at that time. So they're like, okay, we need to do this. Let's do this. So they were putting wedding bands and stuff like that, even gold medals from Olympic medalists they were throwing in there because they wanted to get rid of that debt. If you go look at North Korea has a similar ideology in the beginning, which they call juche, which is a form of nationalism. Mm-hmm. They too wanted independence. They wanted economic independence. We want to be able to kind of do it all on our own and have our pride in what we do. And up to a certain point, yeah, it did, right? They had that. But again, when it's kind of look at it this way. When you may be an individual, right, in a group, but that's the thing, you're in a group, right? And how large is your group, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's better to be flexible, right? And to be able to kind of be able to have conversations with a lot of different people, right? Because why? It's not just resources or things like that, but it's an exchange of ideas. There's more rapport. There's more. Then you also have this respect that can, there's this unsaid standard of respect, right? That's there. But when you have this, ideologies and things like that, now it's like you play my way or the hard way, right? And so it can be very rough, right?
And create a lot of blind sides.
A lot of blind sides, a lot of friction, and that's when around those times where, like, when you saw the Eastern Bloc fall in the 90s, that's when you saw North Korea become very isolationist, right? And they were like, oh, we can't do this, we don't want to be like them, da 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 da. And then you have everything going on with China, right? They had their relationship with China, which
they still do.
They still do, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things about, they say sanctions and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on that we don't know about, right? Even South Korea, right? I think it was in 2000s that they had the Sunshine Policy, and that was
what's that?
The Sunshine Policy was basically providing a lot of economic funding from the South Korean government to North Korea for their economic development and things like that.
During the 2000s.
During the 2000s and things like that, but I don't remember exactly.
Wait, South Koreans were giving North Koreans
South
money
Korean government
for development of North
there was
Korea?
like an economic policy that they created called the Sunshine Policy.
Why would they do that if they're an enemy?
So this is where things get a little interesting. Okay. Again, I'm not as well versed in South Korean politics, right? But this is just what I've heard. So this is mostly conjecture. But let's take a look at this. During the time of Park Chung-hee, he was a military dictator. Okay. So
For South Korea.
For South Korea, precisely. And he may not have been that popular, right? So people were protesting the military junta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Naturally so, right? Kind of oppressive, authoritative. You don't have many freedoms, okay? So what do they want? Freedom and stuff like that. So when you look at that time in like the 60s and 70s, you have a lot of these, I call them Korean hippies, right? Their hair's like long, they're playing the guitar and stuff like that, and the tear gas is flying
protesting.
over. Yeah, exactly.
It's the same everywhere, I guess.
Things just don't change, I guess it's just what it is, right? So, maybe there's a sense of freedom and things like that at that time was warranted, right? But also at the time, there was a lot of communist ideologies and things like that were, that people started reading about in universities and things like that. So if we look at it, they were like 20 years old back then, okay? 1970, okay? 30 years later, 2000. Now these people are 50. They're in office. They're in government offices. Did they change their ideologies? Some maybe have, some maybe haven't, right? So can those ideologies now be implemented in that government? Maybe. Maybe those ideologies stuck. Can it be that they're looking, if I look on the other side where it's not so dark, is it that they're looking for a way to reunify, right? East and West Germany, we saw what happened with them during reunification. Their West Germany's economy decreased by what, like 50%, 60%, something like that, when they reunited. So the main issue right now is an economic one, right? For reunification, or so it would seem.
Lucky Boys Podcast.